All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Jason Lehman. Happy to be joined by Tom Johnson. And today we're going to be talking about using Oracle Web Center Content Tracker to better understand the value of content. So here's our agenda for today's meeting. I'll start off with just giving a Fishbowl overview. We'll then talk a little bit about why we picked this topic for a webinar and get into some of the challenges with tracking Web Center metrics today. Tom, as I give the overview of Content Tracker and the additional tracking options for metrics that we're working on, I'll then be turning it over to Tom to give you that demo. So about halfway through, about 15 minutes in, I'll be turning it over to Tom for that demo. I think hopefully most of you that have joined today are really looking forward to seeing, not only for those that aren't using Content Tracker, how to get it configured so you can start using it, but some additional options that you might have to start tracking some of those Web Center metrics. Do a little summary, and then we'll conclude. So a quick overview on Fishbowl Solutions. Again, our overall goal is to help customers solve their costly and frustrating knowledge sharing problems. Since 1999, we've been developing unique solutions across content management, portals, digital assistants, mobile apps, and enterprise search. Fishbowl also provides value-add software products that can extend and enhance the capabilities of Oracle Web Center, as well as PTC, Windchill, and Creo, and the on-premises search solutions from Mindbreeze, Inspire, and Google's cloud-based search solution. As far as why we're here today, so again, why we picked this topic, really to remind everyone that Web Center does have an inherent capability through Content Tracker to track some Web Center user metrics. So later in the webinar, as I mentioned, Tom will show everyone how to configure Content Tracker so you can begin doing just that. We'll also be sharing with you some additional content tracking options that Fishbowl is working on and that are being developed to provide Web Center customers with more user-based tracking metrics. This includes exposing such metrics through Google Analytics. And then, as I mentioned, Tom will show you a brief demo of that as well. So some of the problems. So for customers that aren't tracking content usage and metrics in Web Center today, to start off, organizations won't know who is or is not using the system. And the problem that might uncover from this is that some of your user base may be storing content within another CMS like Office 365 or SharePoint, Google Drive, or even on file shares or even their desktop. And knowing this can help you enact system use and content management policies to ensure content is being stored in Web Center. Customers also ask and are curious as to when peak usage of Web Center occurs, not only daily, but over a period of time. Not knowing this can lead to questions about system performance, especially if you consider about how much content needs to be reviewed across your enterprise in specific times of the year. Such content as benefits information, updates, or new policies and procedures. Knowing these peak usage times could help you better plan for these spikes. What about tracking the most popular items? So perhaps your organization has multiple content creation groups in your HR, marketing, and legal departments, and each of those groups is going to want to know if the content they're producing is being accessed and read. Not having insight into what assets are most and least popular could make this prioritization very difficult. And for organizations that have multiple locations, you're using Web Center to drive content to those locations. If you're not tracking the content by that location or group, you won't know if a change to maybe metadata or document titles could perhaps improve accessibility. Knowing this will help you better target that content to specific groups or locations. And then system performance. I mentioned this earlier, but really this is about how much content you have stored in Web Center and looking at how many times that content is accessed, really to help you make decisions on cleaning up the system, cleaning up the content, deleting or archiving that content that is no longer needed. So how can content tracking help? So to reiterate a little bit here, if you're able to track content metrics, you'll have a better understanding of the content that's being created and accessed in your organization. So again, those groups that are creating that content can better profile the content consumers and better target content to them. Another benefit would be taking proactive measures to ensure content that must be read by groups is happening. Knowing this can help ensure your company's critical policies and procedures are known and followed. You'll also be able to identify and enter more specific information regarding content access and user sessions. So Having insight to when content is being accessed and where can really help you plan for system downtime for updates to the content server, as well as additional communications that may or may not be necessary at different times of the year to ensure content is being accessed. And lastly, content tracking can provide data to make decisions on improving WebCenter's overall performance. Perhaps complaints on the system is slow, or users not being able to find anything can help your organization make architectural or infrastructure changes, as well as, again, purging some content that's really no longer valid. And as a value-add WebCenter partner, Fishbowl is continuing to invest in developing software solutions to fill other gaps. So as we talk about today, introducing the content tracker, we'll get into some of those other solutions we're working on. So just as a reminder, Oracle Web Center includes a component called Content Tracker to give you some of these capabilities. This is an optional component, must be enabled. So if your organization would like to start using it, you have to enable the component, and then you'll be able to monitor and record various system activity metrics. This includes the content that's being accessed and taking a look at what services are driving those accesses, as well as the users that are accessing that content. By default, Content Tracker defaults to the most optimally configured settings. So that means that if you want to capture other metrics like user activity, you have to configure this, and Tom will talk a little bit about that. And then you'll be able to generate reports showing some of this data in a table or grid view. So let's quickly cover the three components or features of Content Tracker. The first is the ability to really record that Web Center data. So Content Tracker can capture static URLs, which with the web server filter, records and saves in log files. It can also monitor services that return that content. So an example of this would be when native documents such as Word documents are accessed. But really, Content Tracker can also be configured to monitor any service. The logging service supports a single service call to log an event. This can be done with the URL as an action in the service script or from an IDOC script. If you're going to collect user profile information, you can choose database tables to obtain information about active users during this reporting period. And lastly, you can expose an API to register other components and applications for tracking. So if you're still using Site Studio, you could use this API to log events in real time from what's happening on those Site Studio-based websites. Second feature of Content Tracker is data reduction. And this is basically what happens to the data after it's been recorded. So by default, Content Tracker only records data for content accesses. As an option, you can configure Content Tracker to generate search relevancy data and store it as metadata. To do this, you do need to enable the snapshot function in Content Tracker. And if you do, the values in the custom metadata fields are updated following reduction processing. So this could be used to show what your most popular Web Center items are. Data is collected and added to the tables when new and recent data contained in primary tables, and then the older data is moved to the archive tables. So content accesses are recorded. So really how they're recorded depends on the mode that's used to access. So the example I gave earlier is if content is accessed through a service, such as accessing the native file, the events are recorded in the primary table right away and not dependent on any reduction process. But on the other hand, if content is accessed through static URLs or the web location, the web server filter records the events in the static log file. And then it's during that data reduction process that the log files within the date range are moved to the access table. So if data is not reduced for a given date, this data would not be recorded. So data sets are reduced in chronological order. Just keep that in mind as data reduction it's recommended that this is done on a daily basis. This data reduction can be scheduled so that it runs automatically, or you can do it manually. And then lastly, you can delete the data files containing this reduction data, kind of at will. The third component is really the reporting. So the captured and reduced data can be used to generate these reports that show the usage history. The predefined reports are configured for maximum performance. Again, I mentioned this earlier. So that just really means that not as much data is going to be recorded, so additional configuration is going to be necessary. Custom reports can be built, and an external commercial reporting tool can be used. This data can then be viewed and drilled down into. For example, if you're looking at the top or most popular content items to report on, the document name is included as a link. You can then click on that link to see access details for that item. So quick architecture and flow diagram of the processes involved to make Content Tracker work. Shown here is the standard process because, again, Content Tracker defaults to this. This is the optimal configuration, if you will. to ensure the best Web Center performance. So with its standard configuration during the data reduction process, the static URL information is extracted from the raw data files and combined with the service information that's stored in the access log, this SCT access log table. So depending on the configuration, Content Tracker can combine access information for static URLs with service details, as well as summarize the user accounts that were active during the reporting period. This information is then written to the metadata database tables. If you're looking to do a little bit more, that's when you can configure Content Tracker to capture some more of the activity metrics. So this diagram gives you more of that overview with data reduction that includes those activity metrics. So this includes search relevancy data. But again, just to mention that depending on what you choose, which activity metrics to capture, you have to use the snapshot function. And that's part of the configuration. So if you do that, you can show this usage information with the popularity of content items, for example. The difference in the process flow is really the values in the custom metadata fields are updated following the reduction processing phase. So by accessing these items, users change the values of the applicable search relevance metadata fields. And then some SQL queries happen. These are used to determine which content items were accessed during the reporting period. And then Content Tracker updates the database table metadata fields with the new values and initiates that reindexing cycle. This post-reduction step is necessary to process and tabulate the activity metrics for each affected content item, and then to load that data again into that assigned custom metadata field. Just want to make sure everyone's aware of some of the limitations of Content Tracker. So the first one here is really around access counts for static URLs or WebDAV. So if a user accesses a document through WebDAV and then accesses it later, only the first count is recorded. For static URLs, if users save this URL for access later and the file is revised, making that link invalid, Content Tracker records this as a successful delivery. So you might have some higher counts than are really actually what they should be. Content Tracker web server filter plugin runs in the authorization context of user access. So logs get created if they don't already exist, but only if the user has write permission to the data directory. Additionally, requests aren't recorded if using the extranet look component. So if there is a form or page that you use for anonymous access on login, Content Tracker can only record accesses from authenticated users. Then case sensitivity with Oracle or DB2 databases. So the entered value must match the capitalization of the metadata value to be recorded. And ideally, users should only be able to see anything through Content Tracker reports that they should be able to see through Oracle Web Center Content Server Search. And if this is enabled through secure mode, reports are filtered based on the user's role and account privileges. However, if ACLs are used, the secure mode option does not work. Lastly, and maybe not so much of a limitation, but if you are using Oracle database and aliases to display column names, you must do some additional configuration as well. So if that is an overview of what is possible with Content Tracker, we wanted to also let you know that we're actively working on additional Web Center metric solutions to provide this additional insight. These solutions that we're working on will provide additional reporting capabilities, including a graphical user interface that can be embedded directly within Web Center, as well as a Google Analytics integration. So these solutions are really being developed because we've heard from a lot of Web Center customers, so that you all would like to have more insights into Web Center usage data, including real-time data and showing usage over a period of time, or sessions during off hours. And so again, giving you insight in when the peak times are and when off-peak times are. And during peak times, what are the users actually doing? What are they accessing? Additionally, if you've invested in a third-party search system like Mindbreeze, you'd be able to see referrals from this search source or appliance, helping you determine how the users are getting to content and if more of them need to be using more of a relevant search tool like Mindbreeze provides. Other things include site and page speed, so content access load times, as well as who is or who is not using the system. And this is just really scratching the surface of what we plan to develop and work on, but we'd love to hear additional capabilities that you're all looking for. And with that, I'm going to transition to Tom to the demo. Tom's going to show you, he'll start off with a walkthrough on how to get Content Tracker configured for use. And then once he's done with that, he'll show you a preview of the other analytics options we're working on.
As you can see here, I have just a local content server that is running on my machine. And let's get started on how to enable and configure Content Tracker. So as an administrator, you can go under Admin Server and then Component Manager. And down in the list, you'll see Content Tracker as an option. You can check that and hit Save at the very bottom or Update. Otherwise, you can also navigate to the Advanced Component Manager page and cycle it through from the disabled component up to the enabled components. And then there are also some configurations that you need to be aware of when enabling this component. So I'll click Update here to walk you through them. So first off, Jason had mentioned it, but initially this checkbox is checked, this top one here. So this is only enabling Content Tracker to track content accesses. So that's kind of the bare bones way of doing it. You know, it's just going to track that. It's not going to track any of the custom services or the search services either. And so I'm going to have that unchecked on mine to show you a few more of the configurations available when that's the case. These next several are all kind of trying to optimize it and, you know, create the least amount of load on the system, because it's obviously tracking a lot. So, you know, a lot of user services are handling this. So this first one, these are different columns in the Content Tracker database that you can exclude from being populated. So that can help with load there. You can simplify the user agent string. So that's the user that's performing that action that gets tracked in the table. Here's the maximum days to retain the data. So I just have 60 as a default. That's what's going to get stored in the table. And then this next one is an option to either archive or delete the data after it's hit that, you know, maximum days retained. And so there's also the archive database table where the reports aren't going to necessarily pull from that, but you can keep that information if you needed. Otherwise, it's recommended that you delete it to, you know, reduce the load. And these ones keep a couple of the columns in the database table to a certain length. And I won't talk too much about these next ones. They're kind of outside of the scope of this webinar, but this first one, Jason talked a little bit about it. There's some customizations you can do, or custom logic you can add during that post-reduction step. And then the web beacon ID list. This is kind of relevant if you're using, say, Site Studio, or doing, if you have a reverse proxy setup to kind of cache some of the data. You can configure this to ensure that those actions are getting tracked by the content server and Content Tracker. So once you have that enabled, it does require a restart, but then you'll have the option to go to the Content Tracker administration. So let's jump over there and then open that applet. I actually already have it open, so here we go. So there are a couple tabs in here. The first one's very simple. It's really just enabling your content server to actually track the data. It should be checked by default, but if you get it installed and restarted and it's not tracking content, here's the first place you check to make sure that this is enabled. Next is the reduction tab. So you can come here, you can see kind of the data that's ready to be reduced. So for the last couple of days, I have some of the things, they've actually already been completed, but you can come here manually and reduce that data, although it's recommended that you schedule it, as Jason has mentioned. So here you can see, you can come to the Schedule tab and check the scheduling enabled checkbox, and then kind of go from there. So it's recommended that you run it daily. So maybe you just run it every weekday. It's recommended that you do it off hours because it does create load on the system. It gives you that option of scheduling this around your peak times. The next tab is the Snapshot tab. So this gives you some features on the actual content item itself. So you can get a little more information per content item. So what you see here, these are metadata fields, custom metadata fields that I created in my system. And essentially what this allows you to do is per content item, you know, you can get when that content item was last accessed. You can also get a count of how many times it was accessed in this short count this short interval I set for 30 days, so the last month. There's also the long access count, so I set that for about 6 months, so you can kind of see any trends on content in those time frames. And then this last tab is only available if you have that first checkbox on the configuration page unchecked. But essentially what this allows you to do is track any service that you'd like. So if you have some custom services in your environment that you'd like to track, you can set that up here by clicking add and filling out the form. And you can see it gives you some examples like this get search results one. If I hit edit here, you can kind of see some of the information over here, as well as on the field map side. You can get additional information that's then can be put into the content tracker database table. So there are 10 columns that are available to use. And what you get with that is essentially a way to store this information. Like for this search one, you can get that query text that the user is actually using into the database, so you can report on that and maybe see some trends there. All right, so that is it for the applet. Now we can talk kind of about the reporting side of things. So there is an Oracle Content Tracker report component. It is, however, with 12c deprecated. And so what happens with that is you actually need to rename the component in order for it to work. That's not too hard to do. Fishbowl has the ability to provide that. But essentially what it is this report here. And it gives you a lot of good initial options that you can use. And so I'm going to jump over to one of our demo servers to kind of give you a little bit better of an idea. But essentially it's a pretty simple form. You give it the time frame. So let's say last week, you can say, what's the top content that was accessed last week in my system? Gives you the number of accesses, doc type. And so you can go to the content information page if you need to get more information about the specific item. Other ones you can track by, say, doc type, if you want to, see about a specific doc type, if there are trends regarding that, or say a user role, if there are specific users that should be looking at content, or maybe you're just trying to get a better idea of, HR users or sales users, what content are they looking at? You can do that with this report. You can also do some searches by users. So if you wanted to see, if you had a specific content item that should be viewed by specific users, you can come here and see which users have actually viewed that content and maybe which users are yet to view that content. You can do that here. There's also a couple good ones down here. You can kind of see what content items have not been used in a certain period. So, if in a couple month span items aren't being used, you can come here and do that. And then maybe you can purge that content out of your system. There's also users not active. So you can see if users aren't even using your system, that maybe should be. You can do that here. And so another feature that the content tracker reports gives you is on an actual content item, you can view the access history for that item. So you can see, this item has been viewed 4 times and by 1 user. So you can kind of click on that and get more information on those times, the dates, as well as which user it was. And one additional thing I wanted to show you before I jump over to Google Analytics is when you actually access the content using a Git file, it does log that initially, or right away, I should say. And so now you can see 5. However, if you right away, after viewing it, with the web viewable static link, this does not get updated. And what that shows you is it needs to be reduced. So it's logged elsewhere, not in the database that's reported on. So if you come here and actually run that, we can come run this report again, and now you can see 6. So it did then put that information in the database to then be reported on. And now I'd like to transition to the reports that we've created outside of Content Tracker. So we have the system metrics. So here we have just a nice graphic on the document history component or database table. So you can get some ideas on, when there's peak activity and what kind of activity that is, as well as a table of that information. And the next thing on the actual content tracker table, you can get additional information. So a bunch of different services that have the ability to be tracked and then reported on. So this could be a really good visual to get some good information on your system itself. And now I'll jump over to the Google Analytics side. So here you can see on the actual dashboard itself, there's some really good information about users, the number of users you can get information on. So who's using your system, how many, as well as active sessions and session duration. So you can see some really good trends on that over the last certain days, and it's a really powerful tool. There's also real-time reporting. So I'll show you that page in a second, but you can get some real-time. You can also see where or how people are getting to your system, as well as where they're accessing it from. So you can see us, we're heavily in the United States, but there's also a couple in the UK. And then what time of day, which it can be really powerful to see when you have your peak time. And so a couple of the pages I'd like to show, I'll go to the real-time quick. So you can see what pages they're actually using, how many are active, as well as where they are. So that can be a really powerful tool to give you more information about your environment. And then here, you can also look at, let's go under traffic, referrals. You can see how they're getting to your page. So as Jason mentioned, we have a Mindbreeze, a third-party search tool. So with that, we can see that users are actually using it, and that's how they're getting their content. There's also all pages. So you can see which pages are the most popular, what are users doing, how many times that's happening, average page load, which we can also go to site speed and view an overview here. And you can see there's a lot of good information on, your average load or page load time, by browser. Is there a browser that performs better? You can see by country, what's the average load speed there, as well as, by page, maybe you have specific pages that a lot of users are hitting and they're, not optimized or something like that. You can get some good information there. And with that, I think I can pass it back to Jason. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Tom. That was great. What Tom showed you a little bit of is, again, understandably, we're trying to help organizations better leverage and utilize WebCenter. So making it known again that Content Tracker does exist. And overall, the tracking content, if you look at reasons why you should be tracking content, have an insight into, who's not using the system, what content's being accessed, can help drive decisions on more effective content management, not only from creation, but distribution, and then how that content is being, how metadata is applied, how it's being named, so on and so forth. So again, Content Tracker's free component. So again, we've worked with many companies to help them get that configured. Tom showed you a little bit of that today in terms of the configuration process and the options that you have within that configuration, which will really be based on your use case. And then as we're trying to provide that additional value to WebCenter customers, we're getting a lot of requests for, deeper dive into the metrics, so more data being exposed that can be used to make decisions. And as Tom showed, we're looking at ways to embed that right directly within Content Server, as well as exposing it through really powerful tools like Google Analytics. So with that, we are going to take some questions. So one question here on the data reduction process, Tom, is it reducing the Content Tracker log data or the real data in the system?
Yeah, so we refer to it, as the static link. So that's getting stored in a log file. So it's not in the database and isn't reported on real time, or I should say right away. It takes that data reduction process to actually get that data into the database to make sure that the reports you're running are accurate.
Okay. So Tom, real quick, you also mentioned that the search report tool was deprecated. What version was it deprecated in? Do you know that information?
I believe it was just 12C.
Okay, so it was deprecated with the first version of 12C. Okay. So for customers on 11G, it would still be there.
Correct.
So Tom, regarding that, so I think you mentioned it, to re-enable those reports in 12C, can you just go through that process of how to re-enable it, even at a high level, and we can respond directly to this person with more details?
Yeah, of course. So essentially what you need is the 11G version of the component. So you can either download it from, an old version, or we can probably provide that as well. But essentially you need to change the name in the component HDA and rebundle that, and then install that component into your environment. So it sounds pretty involved. It's a couple pretty easy steps that we'd be able to help with. And then it's as easy as installing the component and enabling it and restarting to get those base reports.
Okay, Tom, another question here about tracking content based on profile. Is that possible? Or would there be a configuration or extension like we showed with Google that would enable that?
Yeah, so I don't think that's a report out of the box, but you can create custom reports. So you'd be able to get that functionality if that's something that you needed, but it would take additional work to get that.
Yeah. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions, Tom, so thank you for answering those. And again, thanks everyone for attending today. Hopefully you got a little bit more insight into Content Tracker, as well as giving you some ideas and other ways that you could use tools such as Google Analytics or embed other reporting capabilities directly within WebCenter to track some of those metrics. So with that, I'm going to conclude today's webinar, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks again.